My name is Greg Skasny. I'm the CTO and co-founder here at Blueshift Cybersecurity. A little bit about me. Prior to us founding Blueshift, I was CTO and co-founder of a company called Cygent. Blueshift was actually spun out of Cygent, and prior to that, I spent most of my time doing offensive network security. So I did red teaming and adversary emulation, pen testing, risk management framework, those sorts of things. So just a generally curious guy. I love what I do. I hate our adversaries and the bad guys, and so this platform was put together to help customers of all sizes get the level of protection that the big guys have. I teach at some cool places like NASA, and I teach for the IRS. I teach for state and local law enforcement, for elections offices, for lawyers, doctors, all those kind of unique places like that. So I've been doing this a long time, and I'm sometimes opinionated about what I do, but there are kind of the right way and wrong ways to go about defensive security, because defensive security is a hard thing. It's a hard nut to crack, I guess, and that you can see that in the news every day. You hear about data breaches all the time. The one thing I can't do is I can't make pictures, so any images you see here are intended for educational purposes only and used under fair use and all that stuff. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is what our platform does, and I'm going to start that premise with what you think you want, or what most people want that I talk to, versus what you really need from a defensive cyber platform. What most people want is the ability to say, hey, just keep the bad guys. And I'm going to call them adversaries, whether you want to call them hackers, whether you want to call them, script kiddies, whoever you want to go. They're just adversaries. Let's just put it that way. So you want to keep an adversary out of your organization. You don't want them to get in. You don't want them to intrude. You don't want them to snoop around and do those sorts of things. And I'm here to tell you that that's just not possible. I'm going to show you. Okay, it's not just me saying that, but I'll kind of prove it to you. And that's a shocker to most people. Even if you take your computer and you unplug it and you throw it in a closet, if you have a determined adversary who really needs the data off that computer, they're probably going to find a way to get to that as well. You're not going to stop a determined adversary from penetrating your system. So the problem you have when you take that approach of I'm going to be 100% preventative means you have to be 100% right. I'm going to get to a slide to that in a second. So what you need to add to that preventative, I'm not saying get rid of your preventative technologies. Don't throw away your firewall. Don't throw away your antivirus or your EDR, those sorts of things. But you need to be able to have the ability to detect and respond to anomalies in your environment, right? So you need to be able to collect data that you can tell that something odd is happening in the environment, be able to investigate that and make an actionable decision from that data. And you need to be able to do that quickly. The problem is most organizations, especially on the SMB side, don't have A, the expertise, B, they don't have the budget. And even if we gave them the platform for free and said, here's all the data, try to figure it out, they would not be able to make actionable decisions based on all that data because it's a lot. And so that's where we come in. We provide the platform, we provide the expertise, we provide the monitoring so that businesses of all sizes can have that capability within their organizations. So like I said, I'm going to address the elephant in the room, and that means that every data breach, every ransomware event, every intrusion, everything you've ever heard on the news, every pipeline thing, every coin miner thing you've heard about, all those organizations had preventative measures, right? They had antiviruses and firewalls and all that kind of stuff. And in every case, they were breached. And if they weren't breached, if all those preventative measures worked, we wouldn't be talking about it. We wouldn't have a problem. I wouldn't have a company. We would be doing something else. But here we are. The problem's not getting any better. And so we have to think a little bit differently about how we're defending and those sorts of things. And so why is it that these things don't work? And there's a lot of reasons, right? So I just have two up here, but really there are a lot of reasons. So one is obviously we call the attack surface, the ever expanding attack surface. Everybody's moving to cloud because they think cloud is the most secure way you can go. And if you don't secure your cloud the right way, you're not monitoring your cloud environment. That's just another attack vector for the adversary. There's 0-day vulnerabilities, which means 0-day vulnerability is a vulnerability in a piece of software that there's not a patch for, and maybe the vendor doesn't even know about, but the adversaries know about, so they can exploit that vulnerability to gain access into your organization. Those are, again, unless you have a detection response, you're not going to be able to deal with those. And it's just a much bigger problem. From the offensive side of cybersecurity is technically more difficult, to be able to write an exploit and do those sorts of things. But it's a much easier thing to do against an organization, because you can pick very specific things. Like if you're going to, even as a paid pen tester, if you're going to pick a target that you've been paid to do things against, you can pick a specific technology or a specific individual or group of individuals, right, to say, I'm going to target these for my initial exploitation. As a defender, you don't know what the real adversary is going to pick, so you have to defend it all, right? That's a much bigger lift than trying to get in. And as an offensive guy, just if I miss the first time, I try again, and that's part of what comes into talking about that preventative defensive model. As an adversary, they only have to be right once, and you as a defender have to be right 100% of the time, which means you have to be perfect. And perfection's not something that's attainable, right? You can't be perfect; just not possible. So you put yourself on the losing end of the equation, which is why we have the problem we have today. So we just need to think a little bit different, right? We need to think about how we're doing this. So we have to find the ways to take a tactical advantage against the adversaries. And so what we do and what we assume is, we assume that we know you're going to be compromised, right? Again, make yourself a hard target, please. Make sure you're using long passwords. Make sure you have good firewall rules. Make sure you have an EDR or an antivirus in place, and all the other things you can do around controls. But when that initial compromise happens, and you that attacker gets in, he needs to do things. Now we can take our advantage. Now that attacker needs to be very, very quiet, because now we're watching, right? If that adversary trips a single indicator of compromise, or trips something that we're detecting, we monitor, we see one single thing that gives us a little inkling that happens, we've caught them, and now we can start to take action against him, and we can do that very, very quickly. That means that now they have to be perfect, and we know they can't be perfect, so we put them on the losing end of the equation. That's the paradigm we want to try to operate in, and it just takes a lot of data to do that. If you take one thing away from this presentation, please take this slide away and talk about it, because this is one of the most important metrics when it comes to defensive cybersecurity, and we call it dwell time. So dwell time is that time from that initial compromise, which, again, we prove it's going to happen, we know it's going to happen, until the time you detect that compromise. Okay, so that's the amount of time that adversary has spent inside the environment that he's exploited. In the United States, according to IBM, that amount of time is on average 207 days. Now, think about that. If you have an active adversary or adversary group in your organization for 100 days or 150 days, 150 plus days, 200 days, the cost to remove that adversary is astronomical, right? Because what do you have to do? Now you have a full-blown incident. You need to, if you don't have a system like ours, right? So you're calling out the incident response team. You're calling in forensic investigators who are digital cyber forensic investigators to try to figure out what's going on. If you have regulatory compliance issues, you're calling your regulators. You're probably going to be on the news. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars on average. And some, again, the larger the organization, the more infrastructure you had, those costs go up exponentially. So millions of dollars. Sometimes you're replacing infrastructure to remediate that intrusion, that breach. And that's a problem. That's why companies go out of business. That's why you see them on the news. Depending on what sector you're in, sometimes there's national security implications behind that. If you're in the Richard had mentioned things like water plants and things like that. So if you're in the industrial control system or operational technology vertical, then you have life safety issues to worry about and those sorts of things. So if you can reduce that dwell time to hours, minutes, or days, days being the longest, now what you have is an event. You don't have a full-blown incident. You have an event that is usually fixable by an IT person. You have a single machine that's been compromised. You may have a single vulnerability that was compromised. You may have to take a machine off and restore it to a known good configuration. You may have to what we call nuke and pave a machine, which means take the machine off, put a known good image back on it, put it back online, fix the hole however they got it in the first place. You're talking a couple hours worth of work, a couple $100, maybe $1,000, whatever the case may be. It's orders of magnitude less than if they're in there for 100 days or 150 days. And that's where you want to be, because again, we know they're going to get in. So we want to make the impact to the business, both financially and from an operational standpoint, as minimal as possible. And the way you do that is by minimizing your dwell time. So that's when you talk about important cybersecurity metrics, that's the important one, because that's the one that matters. There's all kinds of other metrics. You talk to mean time to detection, all the other kind of stuff, but really what matters, this is what matters, because this is what makes things costly when the bad things happen, and the bad things are going to happen. So how do we do this? How do we decide, what we're going to look at and all that kind of stuff? So defensive cyber, what we call blue team cyber. So that's, there's two sides of cybersecurity. There's the blue team, which is the defensive side, and there's the red team, which is the offensive side, right? And then there's things we call purple teams and things like that. But for the most part, let's just talk about good guys and bad guys, blue teams and red team. From the blue side of cyber, it's really a big data problem. You need to be able to ingest data from many different sources, normalize that data, understand what you're looking at, and then make decisions based on that data, like I said before. So that's what we do with our platform. So this is not my graphic, I stole it, but this line here represents kind of the delineation of where we need to put automation, because again, the amount of information you're going to collect is so great and so vast. There's no way you're going to be able to make sense out of it unless you have automation behind there. And then you need to take the human capital that you have, the analyst capital, the cyber guys that are out there looking at the stuff. Those guys are hard to find, guys and gals. They're hard to find. Those people are hard to find. Those people are expensive. And so you need to arm them with the best information possible so they can spend their time hunting in the best way possible. And so that's what we try to do. All the things from this line below are what we call indicator-based detections, right? IOCs. They're called indicators of compromise if they're malicious, but they're basically indicators, right? So there's a ton of this information available in any environment. It doesn't matter how you're configured. You can be 100% on-prem, you could be hybrid, you could be 100% cloud. You can, however you're set up, these things exist in the environment, and they're collectible. There also exist for adversaries too, right? So the adversaries have these artifacts and network things that are on there. And so we want to collect those. Now, again, their problem is they're very, very plentiful. So this is what our automation does. Our automation looks at all this indicator-based detections there, and makes suggestions, the best way I can put that, sends alerts to our SOC staff to say, okay, here's what we're seeing. You need to hunt for things to tell us to see if that's malicious, because the things above this line are much more difficult for automation to detect. Not that we don't try, but and that'll get better over time. But currently, the things that the tools that adversaries use, or I'm going to talk about some of them in a minute too, but post-exploitation tools like Cobalt Strike, getting a little bit easier to detect with automation. There's a new one called Silver, which is an open source command and control framework. There's other command and control frameworks and tool sets and things that adversaries use that sometimes are just difficult because they use legitimate tools to do things. Attackers may use what's called, and you can hear me see a slide on this, called living off the land binaries and scripts. It's programs that are 100% legitimate that they can do illegitimate things with. Those things are difficult to have a piece of automation tell you what's wrong. So you really need a person there to say, okay, I see this, I have these type of indicators, let me make a hypothesis about what that looks like, and let me hunt for things that would show me this is malicious. Again, whether that's looking for tools, whether that's looking for what we call TTPs. TTPs are tactics, techniques, and procedures or processes, whatever word you like. It's how adversaries do what they do. It's how they enumerate systems. It's how they do reconnaissance. It's how they privilege escalate. It's how they pivot around networks. It's how they exfiltrate data. It's all these, the how they do that. And those things are attributable to different adversary groups and things like that. But again, very tough to discover with automation. It's tough to even to put those together with a human, but that's where they need to be looking, because those are the things that tell you that, hey, this set of legitimate tools being used this way is not legitimate. This is malicious, and we need to respond to that. So that's how we do what we do with the data we collect. Sounds simple, but it's not easy. Maybe it doesn't sound simple, but how we do that is what you see on the screen. I apologize, the screen is busy, but this is what our platform does, and I'll explain the pieces and parts of our platform. You can't protect what you can't see. So again, our platform is all about getting that visibility into the environment, and getting that visibility as quickly, as cost effectively, and as technically simple as we can. Right. So those things are, all those three things are important. You know, if your solution's way too expensive, an SMB is not going to buy it. If your solution's way too complex to install, they're not going to install it. Right. But you need to be able to have that broad visibility. So we work real hard at trying to make it as simple as possible. That kind of starts with this part here, kind of what we call the SIM piece of that. So we use a back end, an open search back end, to collect data from many, many different sources, right? So what we're trying to do is get data into a single platform, a big data platform that we can then use to write algorithms against, all that kind of stuff. And so OpenSearch works very, very well for that. We have to write filters and all kinds of other stuff, but so this kind of sits in the back end and allows us to gather data and put it in there and search and do the correlations and things. So we'll get data from agents. So we have agents that sit on your Windows, Linux, Mac, AX, Solaris, all that sort of thing, and will send us telemetry data. So our agents are not meant to be a replacement for, again, we're detect and response. They're not meant to be a replacement for your EDR, your antivirus. We do integrate with those that I'll talk about in a second, but those only send so much, right? They're looking for malware. They're looking for those sorts of things. We want telemetry. What I mean by telemetry, it's all the other things on that system. It's all the log files. It's all the command prompts that run. It's all the configuration information. It's all the processes that are running. It's all the software that's installed, all the vulnerabilities, all those sorts of things that are on that piece of equipment that we want to be able to look at over time. And so that's what our agents facilitate us in doing that and getting that information in there. The next thing we will do with that piece is now then start integrating in other pieces of information that would be interesting. Cloud, for example. So we have API integrations into most cloud platforms. So your Azure's, your Office 365, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, G Suite. I have a slide I'll show all these with, but all those cloud things and SASEs and authentication programs and things like that. We want to bring in information from those as well. So we can correlate things we see. Cloud is one of those kind of mystery places where people don't know what's going on. So we try to write detailed enough integrations with what's available to look for anomalies and correlate that to machines we see and all that kind of stuff. So that gives us, now we're getting a pretty good visualization of what's happening inside that environment. The next piece we add into is what's called our MNDR piece. So MNDR stands for Managed Network Detection and Response. So this is in companies that have networks. So you're, again, ICS and OT places, people that are on-prem or people who are hybrid, that have office buildings and things like that. Wherever you have a network, you don't have to have server infrastructure. You can just have an office with computers there. We want to collect network level data and do things on the network level. That's important. And the reason being is looking at network data allows you to do two things. One, it's not bypassable by an adversary, a remote adversary, even a local adversary. Most software, so most of your EDRs, antiviruses, even our agent to some extent, they're software driven. And if you get enough privileges on a system, you can start to bypass software. They try to make it difficult, but trust me, every antivirus out there I've seen bypassed in some way or another working on incidents. So we want to make sure we have a non-bypassable detection mechanism, and network data does that. They can't stop us from looking at it. We can go on a spanner tap, we can sit in line, there's nothing they can do. The collector doesn't really have an IP address. It doesn't have to have an IP address in the networks that it monitors. So it's really hard. It's just not possible for them to bypass that because they have to use a network to do the things they do. The other thing it does is allow us to see all the things, and all the things is a very important concept in information security. There's tons of devices and things that sit on your network, whether it's networking equipment, whether it's, if you're in IoT equipment, if you're into ICS and OT, so your water plants and those sorts of things. We did an instant response with water plants several times. And you can't put an agent on there. You can't put an antivirus agent on there. You can't put an EDR agent on there. So you need a way to monitor those things, and you can do that with the network side of things. So it allows us to see those devices and protect those devices that you can't put an agent on, and it also allows us to do the correlation, and that'll become very important when you see how we put all this together too. We have, of course, there has to be automation around there, so we have the SOAR functionality that works within our product that allows that automation to automatically block certain things and correlate things and all that kind of stuff. And the whole solution is monitored by our SOC. Our solution is not sold as a platform; it's sold as a service. It comes with a SOC. It's all OpEx. There's no CapEx expenditures with the system. But our SOC is US based. It's virtual, runs on Amazon AWS. East West. All of our analysts are background checked. Some of us have clearances for those type of environments. So they're the ones who are doing the threat hunting on a day-to-day basis, right? So watching what's happening, responding to those alerts like I kind of showed you in there. And then we send out alert when our alerts go out. We don't really send out automated alerts like other system where just this automated stuff comes out. When our customers get an alert, it comes from an analyst. So you have someone to work with. We're on the front end doing that blocking and tackling. When we need something from our customers, that's when we reach out and you have someone to actually work with. So that works out really, really well. So I'll talk real quick about some of the MNDR features that we have on the network side. So it's not just sniffing of network data, right? So there's a lot of cool things you can do with network data. So we do have a large collection of threat intelligence. We have both what we call open and closed source, non-attributable intelligence. Our indicators in our threat intelligence database are probably close to 500 million at any one time. They're updated every hour and they're pushed to our sensors every hour. So we track known compromised infrastructure, the command and control sites, malware hosting sites, Bitcoin mining, all that stuff. And the list is very high quality, so we block anything that goes in and out of this list. So that kind of gives us a risk reduction for our customers and increases the signal to noise ratio to our SOC. Anything that tries to come in or out that we already know is bad, just block it and be done with it. But also allows us to watch, right? So we can utilize things like this to watch everything inside that network. And if they try to talk out, if they initiate a connection out, that's bad, right? So that's something that we can then investigate. So that sends an alert to the SOC. It has an IDPS engine. The signatures are done very similarly to like our threat intelligence. They're open and closed source. We write a ton of our own signatures. They're updated every hour and pushed to the sensor. So our signatures and the IDS engine is also very protocol aware for your ICS and OT people. So it does understand ICS and OT protocols as well. And so it allows us to watch for malicious connections and all that kind of stuff. And it does a really, really, really good job. So we have deception. So we run honeypots, right? Honeypots are great, kind of early warning detection for some reconnaissance and enumeration that happens inside organizations. So we run those internally by default on our devices. So they look like a Windows RDP server or an Active Directory server. They look like they could look like a NAS and things like that. Anything internal that talks to our deception engines gets flagged and we investigate. Usually it means you're doing an unauthorized vulnerability scan. You have malware that's trying to pivot. You may have an active adversary in the network, or you have a penetration tester in your network. All things that need to be investigated. We can also run those externally. So we can have customers put what's called a reverse NAT in their firewall and forward some services that they shouldn't have exposed the internet onto our box. These are low interaction honeypots. It's 100% safe to do that. And we watch for these things to be talked to. They don't have DNS entries. They're not production services. So no one externally should ever try to connect to it, but someone's going to. And when they do, we know that that's one of a couple of different things. It's either someone trying to do reconnaissance against their customers, or it's a botnet, which is doing reconnaissance as well. And that's how we keep the botnets at bay. So we have customers that do this and we collect that telemetry. We block that. We add that back to our threat intelligence. It keeps, botnets go out there and they're looking for opportunistic places to get into. And so if you can stay dark to those botnets and not, tip your hat to them, that's something you want to do. Also keeps our customers dark to open source intelligence. So things like what's called Shodan, Netscraper, Census. These are all places that go out. They scan the entire internet. They connect all the services out there. They take screenshots. They run vulnerability analysis, and they store it somewhere else for people to log into and do research on. Well, a lot of the people who do that research happen to be adversaries. Why go out and have to do your own reconnaissance when someone has already done it for you and is willing to give it to you for free? We used them all the time. So the best thing to do is just try to stay dark to those things. And by using that external deception, our customers stay dark to that open source intelligence. We do other neat things. We have time-based things, analytics that run over time to look for anomalies detection and that sorts of things. We have risk algorithms that run on network data to look for changes and mistakes in networks and so those sorts of things. And we store all that network metadata for forensics, right? So we can go back at any point in time and see anything that's traversed that network. And that becomes really, really important when you have an event, right? So then I'm going to talk about that here in a second. On the agent side of things, the agents collect and do these sorts of things, right? So obviously they collect the security information in event management. So that's the log files. So that's the logs, security logs. We use sysmon on Windows machines, so we get sysmon operational logs, gives you all the command lines and all that kind of stuff too. And we store those. Obviously, security logs are very, very important when trying to detect and respond to things. Our agents will do vulnerability detection. So it's not a replacement for a patch management system like a Rapid7 or Cyber CNS. But we want to, in the SOC, we want to see what vulnerabilities are out there, especially when it comes to things like remote code execution vulnerabilities, privilege escalation vulnerabilities, denial of service vulnerabilities against production hardware. Those are things that will get you in trouble. And if an adversary gets into that environment, we'll use those against you. So we want to make sure we try to keep those at bay where possible. Sometimes it's not possible to patch vulnerabilities. We know that. So we just need to put extra monitoring around those devices. So all of the data that comes and gets mapped against the MITRE ATT&CK framework, this is a way we can try to automate it. Many of you may not be familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, but MITRE ATT&CK is basically a mapping of those TTPs I talked about. So all the events that come in from the agents get mapped against that MITRE ATT&CK framework. So it's a classification, right? So we try to then automate around that to help automate some detections around those TTPs, right? But you still need a human to make that determination that what you're seeing is malicious. So we have integrity monitoring, so we watch changes. We can look at changes that happen to those machines over periods of time. We can see the processes that are running on the machines over time. We can see its security configuration, software installations, and the software installation piece and security configuration pieces are very, very important. Software installations in particular, when it comes to things like supply chain attacks, right? So when someone gets in like 3CX, I'm going to talk about that too, but someone gets in and implants malware into a known good application, and then you download and install that, we need to be able to, from a response standpoint, know every single machine that has that software on there, what the version is and all that kind of stuff, so we can respond appropriately. And if you're not collecting that information, it makes it very, very difficult. We can see in any organization we have, we can go and see every piece of software and every single version, and we can do it in like a minute. And so if you don't have that kind of capability and you get hit by a supply chain attack, again, that response is going to be a very, very long time. It's going to be expensive. So we want to not have that. These are the current integrations we have. Like I said, the cloud. We do integrate with endpoint protection and EDR programs, SentinelOne, Sophos, Deep Instinct, CrowdStrike, Windows Defender, and a few others. Again, from our standpoint, that's a preventative piece of technology. They're going to do what they need to do. But what's interesting to us from a SOC perspective is if we see a change in the detection patterns, right? So, in larger organizations, we're going to see a couple of things blocked every now and again. That's not a big deal. But if you start seeing more things being blocked, more pieces of malware or scripts, maybe it's confined to a department, maybe it's executives, maybe it's somebody else. That could be an indication that that organization is being targeted by an adversary, right? It's kind of a little early warning way. So we want to be able to see that so we can prepare ourselves. Just because it does happen from time to time. Um, we integrate with SASE solutions like Cato Networks and authentication solutions like Duo and Okta. We do integrate with a company called CyberCNS, which is a patch management, vulnerability management platform. We integrate with firewalls for blocking purposes. We have appliances that will do blocking. They can sit in line, or they can integrate with firewalls like your Cisco, Meraki's, Palo Alto's, Fortinets, your Sophos, WatchGuard, pfSense, OpenSense, those sorts of things. So, and we obviously integrate with some other programs that we have. We have an application whitelisting program called Blueshift Protect. We obviously integrate with that. And Cygent has a program called their Cygent Data Defense, which puts two-factor authentication around folders and files, and allows us to actually turn on and off two-factor authentication on files if there's a threat, so adversaries can't open them or encrypt them or remove them from the systems. And so we integrate with things like that as well. The other thing we do is we do have a syslog server, and so for people that are in the ICS and OT space, a lot of the times you'll be mandated that you have to store certain syslog information, like from firewalls and switchgear and things like that. And so since we are a log aggregator, we do have the ability to ingest those syslogs. We usually don't analyze them. The telemetry we get from our devices is much broader and deeper. But if there's interesting information in there, there are some cases where customers do send us data that is interesting to us, so we will write a decoder for it. Otherwise, we store it for compliance reasons. So we do have that ability. So I'll kind of hit this last slide here with like, what are some of the things we're kind of seeing with our platform and some of the things we've been responding to here lately. And this is, I've mentioned some of these here just previously on the call. So I'll jump back to this one real quick. So 3CX, right, a supply chain attack. These are nasty. And the reason they're nasty is what happened with 3CX. 3CX is a voice over IP phone software. Adversaries were able to get into the build chain of that particular piece of software, put malware in that build chain. The 3CX developers did not notice. They compiled that program, they signed it with their signing certificate, and they pushed out an update. So this is a signed application. It's a known good type of application. So it ran in a lot of different environments. And as soon as that update ran, those people were instantly compromised. So those are the type of things where our system really shines. I'm going to tell you how we responded to that, because I think it's important to understand why, when you collect all this data, when something like this happens, speed is of the essence, for one, and an incident response and even event response that we do, speed is always of the essence. The faster you get to things, again, it's all about back to that dwell time I talked about. But we were able to go through and see from our backend system every customer that had installed 3CX in the past 60 days. We got a list of those. We can log into their devices, and we can instantly see this. All this I'm talking about took about 15 minutes for all the customers we have. We can see every machine that had 3CX on there. We can see if they had the vulnerable version. We had a couple that did. For the ones that did have that vulnerable version, we can go in and see what else that machine did, right? So we can pull the logs. Did it download anything else? Do we see anything else in the logs? We can pull its network data, right? So we can see if it reached out anywhere. Did it reach out and try to download a second stage? Did that machine log into or try to log into an Active Directory and create an account anywhere? All that kind of, you can look at for all this post-exploitation clues that would be out there to see how bad it is. And luckily for our customers, since we did it very, very quickly, it was just that software being installed. Nothing else happened after that. We were able they were able to pull those off and put an older version back on, and they were good. So, but that's the difference with speed, right? That's what helps that. Papercut and Log4j, two things that Log4j has been around for a very long time. Papercut was a 0-day vulnerability that we had with some customers, where the adversary exploited that 0-day vulnerability and started installing known good applications. They installed what's called an RMM tool, remote monitoring and maintenance tool, and they installed some remote access software. These are legitimate programs that they put on there. Again, but getting to that quickly means that they only got to one machine, right? We can go back and forensically prove that with the network data as well. We can pull that off, and respond appropriately. And they didn't get ransomware like other people did from that kind of stuff. So we see, you heard me talk about LOL BAS. So these are called living off the land binaries and scripts. These are the good programs that are on every computer that can do malicious things. And we do see that a lot in the wild of adversaries, once they get that initial compromise, trying to use tools like that. So if you can then, if you can identify that initial compromise and then see those tools being used, that's a chain that says this is malicious, and we can respond to that. So same thing with what they call fileless malware attacks. These two kind of go together. This is a very misnomer when it comes to a name. They call them fileless malware attacks. They're really not fileless. There's always something that gives them an initial compromise. Like right here, it says opens a phishing email and visits a malicious website, or uses an infected USB memory stick, right? There's files in there. So it's not 100% fileless. But what they don't have to do is download what's called that second stage. They use these things to do that. So again, the installation of those legitimate tools and things like that, and we're seeing a lot of this, this installation of remote monitoring and maintenance tools, or screen sharing tools and those sorts of things by adversaries to try to get past things. Once they make that initial compromise, if you don't catch it, then they're using those legitimate tools to stay underneath the radar. So it's really important that we're catching those initial compromises so you can respond quickly and effectively. And so that's what we do. So that's us. That's what Blueshift cybersecurity does. If you need more information, you can visit our website at www.blueshiftcyber.com.